Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, Mr. Clement Wanko joins us this morning. He's the Executive Director for PLAC. He was actually at that meeting, that session. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today on the program.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Good morning, Mokbe.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, looking through this whole build-up to the elections, and there's a lot of expectations from different quarters, actually. Perhaps gleaning from that meeting, which you attended yesterday, if you could just tell us, what kind of reading do you get in terms of how these elections will play out, both first, if you will, from the perspective of those who are organizing it, what they put in place, and perhaps much later, those who will participate in terms of the electorate?
I think what is very clear is that everyone is looking towards the elections in 2023, and certainly the build-up is what you saw in the meeting yesterday. There are several other meetings. The Independent National Electoral Commission has already issued invitation to observers internationally, whether it's from the European Union, the United Kingdom, the US, Canada, across the world. Those invitations have gone out. And when you open up your process to invite internationals, it means that you know that you have to do the right things. The Commission has also, or is in the process of inviting domestic observers to participate in observing the election. So for me, I think that's really positive to see the openness and the willingness to invite observers from across the world to participate in the elections. And it means that you know that you are under watch already. And I think that when you look at the Electoral Act, it's quite clear in saying that no later than 360 days from the date appointed for an election, INEC needs to issue a notice of the election. INEC has already done that, and we saw that issued, and then because of the amendments to Electoral Act, that date was again officially restated. And the first elections would happen in February, and then the next election would happen in March of next year. So I think that what we are doing at this stage is seeing what the timelines are that INEC has set. It has put out a notice for elections. It has indicated when it intends to conclude and publish a voters register. Of course, it has taken in nominations from political parties and so on, not to say that political parties may not have a hitch. The Electoral Act is quite clear that you could still substitute a candidate in the event of withdrawal or death. So all of those timelines are clearly captured in the Electoral Act. And we're all following the process and hoping that INEC understands the importance and significance of the next elections.
And from what we've seen so far, I mean, the number of people, the sheer number of people who came out to get registered was quite remarkable, especially towards the last minute. And the number of people that we have seen INEC declare at the end of the day as, I think, the total number of registered voters, I think about 84 million thereabout voters. But today, part of the headlines which we saw in the dailies, 1.1 million invalid registrations may be wiped out of that for multiple registration. I believe that INEC will still be running is it the AFIS or AFIX system, whereby they're using to clean the system. For those who are a little apprehensive about how this process could affect them, do you have any reassurances? I mean, for those people who maybe had a trouble or two trying to register in the very first instance.
I think you're right. Of course, INEC appoints the system, which is the AV system that is able to verify the identity of persons who have registered. And when you apply that, and INEC has been doing that in the last 10 years, when you do that, you would find that it cleans out the voters register as best as possible. It's still not able to do it entirely correctly because we still have cases of multiple registration. Yes, you did see a surge of people going to register. Most of it was because some people had moved locations, and rather than try to do the transfer, they register afresh, and that's why INEC is detecting this through its system. Unfortunately, some people who may not have understood how it works and who thought that not having their PVC meant that they have to go register again are going to be caught in this, and it's a question which of their double registration gets knocked off. It could be the old one or the newer one. So I think that's what this system would result in.
Is that still criminal, though, to register twice?
It is criminal. The Electoral Act is quite clear in saying you shouldn't register twice. You shouldn't falsify information. You should provide accurate information to get captured. You should not be underage. All of these are stated very clearly in the Electoral Act, and that's why the conversation is also going on about the Electoral Offences Commission, because when you do have that commission in place, you are going to see that those who have registered double could be liable to arraignment and prosecution.
So we're not even waiting for the elections. I mean, when you talk about electoral offenses, people always imagine that you have to wait till election time for us to record electoral offenses. So these are things that can actually be prosecuted even before an election cycle comes up, or maybe say before an election proper comes up.
It's 365 days a year. Electoral offenses can be committed at any time. It includes the issue even of how much you contribute to a political party, how much a candidate spends for election, how much the political party spends for elections, information you provide regarding your candidature. All of these are issues that could actually be subject to prosecution.
How much you contribute to a political party? How could that be an issue?
Well, it's quite clear what the maximum is that a person can contribute to a political party. So when you do exceed that, and I have to look at the specific figures, but when you do exceed that, then you will be liable to arraignment and prosecution.
That is interesting. That's news to me. What I have seen, what I have heard so far is the controversy that has been stirred. You do know that one of the candidates in the presidential elections was doing a tour of, the diaspora community, and there were talks as to what end they're not going to participate in the elections. Are you hoping to raise funds from there, et cetera, et cetera? And, that, for a number of people, that raised controversy as to whether or not the Electoral Act allows that. From what you know of the Electoral Act, are there any impediments that could stand in the way of people, Nigerians, of course, in the diaspora who would like to donate to campaigns of whatever party they support here in Nigeria?
Again, it's going to be subject to how much an individual can contribute to a political party's campaign. Secondly, there is a lacuna in terms of whether an individual candidate can raise funds from abroad or not, but it's quite clear about a political party, and it says that the political party shall not hold in its accounts monies contributed from abroad. It must submit it back to the commission. So there is a gap in terms of understanding how that operates. So as an individual candidate, I can accept money is coming from abroad,
but not the party.
The party cannot.
Oh.
The whole idea is to be sure that the parties are not representatives of interests from abroad. But again, the distinction between Nigerians and foreigners is also not very clear about this. But certainly if it's money coming from abroad, whether it's from Nigerians or non-Nigerians, and it's paid into the coffers of a political party, it will be subject to regulatory control. But again, the whole idea that someone is raising money from abroad, you also have to look at the whole issue of money laundering and all of that. It becomes critical. So it's not very clear cut, and I think at the end of the day, it's a question that any political party raising monies from individuals abroad, whether Nigerians or not, would have to be very careful how to navigate the money regulatory laws that exist in the country.
From some of the things that you have seen so far, I know that the EU has been saying that political parties should not be pressured by politicians. But from how INEC has conducted itself in the off-season elections and its preparations, the preparations you have seen and observed so far to the 2023 elections, do you think that it is above political pressure?
No, INEC is never, nobody is ever, even you sitting here is never going to be above political pressure. The politicians are going to continue to push to expand their possibilities, and you did see that with some individuals who didn't participate in primaries, getting their parties to be trying to submit their names against those who lawfully participated in the primaries. And INEC has come under pressure as a result of it. So far, INEC has pushed back. I worry more about the pressures on the courts. I worry about the courts.
Why?
I think that the legal system, the court system, has to be better monitored to ensure that individual judges do not become themselves pawns in the play of politicians. And we've seen INEC say, look, we are supposed to monitor primaries. We have gone to these primaries. These are what we have seen. Okay. These are the reports from our officials. And we have seen how INEC has tried to comply with it.
Okay. Pardon me. We need to go to a break. But not to worry. We'll come back and continue this conversation in just a moment. Join us again.
Imo States Amalgamated Traders Association Isamata welcome President Muhammadu Buhari, celebrates Governor Hope Uzodinma on the historic commissioning of key projects as the direct beneficiaries of the brand new roads to be commissioned by President Muhammadu Buhari as he arrives Imo State. We the Traders Association celebrates our indefatigable, dynamic and focused Governor Senator Hope Uzodinma for his landmark projects. Since the Owerri to Olu Road was dualized with that of Owerri to Okigwe Road, we have been enjoying a boom in our businesses. Apart from accessing foodstuffs and other commodities with ease, the prices have also gone down. We thank our listening President, Muhammadu Buhari, for supporting our governor and the state in all our needs. Welcome, Mr. President, to Imo State. We celebrate you, Governor Hope Uzodinma. Emmanuel Ezeanochi, President, Isamata.
All right, welcome back. You go ahead, please. Pardon for that break.
Yeah, no, so I think the bigger concern will be with the courts to be sure that the courts are not manipulated by politicians. INEC has said, look, we went to the primaries, these are our observations, these are the report from our officials, and we are respecting that. But you have seen individuals using the courts to try to pressure a particular outcome, and that's really where the concern should be. And I think that the leadership of the judiciary needs to be very conscious about this, needs to set practice directions that make sure that you don't have the courts try to truncate what is a smooth process.
On some of the points you made earlier about this offshore donations, as it were, but I think there's a case law that says in Nigeria it is the parties that contest elections, not individuals. If that's the case, how do we interpret all of this?
Well, there are several cases, and you did see the Amechi case, of course, where Amechi did not particularly wasn't on the ballot, but then the Supreme Court gave its verdict on it, and we've seen a few other such cases. Bottom line, of course, is that you have also seen the case in Bayelsa, where it was quite clear that the candidate, or the court ruled that the candidate didn't qualify, and then awarded victory to another party. Yeah. So the contradictions in some ways play out. But the reality is, with respect to donations, you want to be quite sure that the parties do not warehouse money that may have the challenge that it tilts the election in an unfair manner. And some parties have more capacity than others to do that. Some parties may have more patronage than others to do that. When you see businesses get contracts from governments in power, are those businesses going to be paying back some of those monies into the coffers of political parties? And we did see that in the Second Republic, that it was a reason for conviction of even party officials when the military seized power in 1983.
You know, I did ask what you see playing out, but if you could extend that to looking at how the registration has gone, lots of young people now between 18 and 34 seems to be the highest in that register who can determine how these elections pan out. So, but there are those who think Well, for that particular group or block of people, actually, you may not have even 50 or 60% of them come out to vote on that day. So from what you've seen over the years, and particularly now, what do you see happening with that figure of registered voters and the demography of those who have registered?
I think you put the word right out, which is demography. And in terms of the experiences we have seen in this country, we have seen the older people being more conscious of the politics, older people, and then you also talk about women in that divide of demography, been much more out there, been much more committed to standing on the queue, waiting and voting. The recent urge at this time is for younger people to get off the streets playing football, get off the social media, and come out on voting day to come out and vote. And if that happens, then I think it could be really significant for elections. I think young people are coming out of school. They're beginning to see that they can't find jobs. The country has an incredible migration rate at this time. Lots of young people are leaving the country. And people are asking, why is this country in this level of deterioration? So the hope is that people get out of their homes, get off social media, get out and be prepared to be patient and wait and vote. Because at the end of the day, it's the only country we have, and you can't have so many people migrate. Yes, a few people will, maybe even much more than before, but a whole lot will not have the capacity to. And we think that rather than being angry, rather than turning that anger into reluctance, turning that anger into separating themselves from the politics, that they should turn that anger into making sure that their PVCs are available, go out there and make decisions based on what they see of the candidates. I think it's quite saddening to see some of the ethnic and religious politics that is creeping in. We are waiting for campaigns to begin in a few days or 2-3 weeks. But we want to see that the issues are what is driving people's decisions to vote, rather than ethnicity, rather than religion, rather than whatever it is that affects people's thoughts.
You know, there's this matter of INEC, the nominees that have been sent to the National Assembly by the president. Much as you've heard the minister say, look, the president cannot just withdraw those names based on what perhaps may have been out there in the public domain or media at that. The National Assembly or the lawmakers who the list is before have a decision to make. So he suggests that let them make that decision. How should we internalize that?
I think the minister is wrong. I think the president was wrong to have made nominations that had questions about the impartiality and non-partisanship of those nominated. I do know that from the Southeast, for instance, a particular governor in the Southeast produced the names and recommendations that were sent to the president of recs from most of the Southeast states. I think the president should have been more circumspect. I think that the president needs to understand that the Electoral Commission that was in place in 2015 when he was elected had less, in fact, almost no accusation of partisanship. And what we have seen since the president started making nominations into INEC has been a preponderance of people who have been questioned about their non-partisanship. So I think the president has failed in not maintaining the tradition of keeping and insulating the commission away from partisanship and politics. And if there is strong perception, because perception is really very important, it's not to say to us, oh, he's not carrying a card of a political party. If the perception is strong that a particular governor produced names, that the names of persons produced are affiliated to political parties, yes, we've had this conversation, but I really don't think that you should give room for suspicion about the bias and partisanship of the candidates, because once elections are perceived to be manipulated and or the commission itself lacks the independence and non-partisanship, then it goes to the credibility of elections. And I think the president has failed in not taking this into cognizance in the names that have been put forward. But I also think that there is an opportunity because all of the comments going on have seen civil society organizations. I do know that the Civil Society Situation Room, for instance, has written to the chairman of the INEC committee in the Senate raising these concerns, and our hope is that this committee will act.
Any reply yet from them?
Well, I don't know. I'm not convened on Situation Room, but I do know that that letter has been written.
Okay. All right, let's bring in my colleagues from Lagos. They've got questions for you as well.
Well, Mr. Walker, straight away, I'll just ask you, do you think that, so now that, of course, the minister says, the president can't just withdraw that list, what then would you recommend to happen? The list will probably go to the National Assembly and from the presidency. If it has not, it will. If it has, what would be your recommendation to the committee or to the National Assembly on that list, knowing that there will be a lot of lobbying?
Thank you, Ayo. I think the minister himself did indeed make the comment that, yes, there is an important need for those who have concerns to raise it with the INEC committee in the Senate. And I think that some organizations have already done so. And the hope we have is that the INEC committee of the Senate, they've done that before. They have had nominations made that they have turned down. I think that they need to again look at this list that has been sent to them by the president. And yes, the minister is right. That's the appropriate place for action to be taken to determine whether these candidates should be approved or not.
Should that kind of list have even gone to the National Assembly in the first place? But let's leave that. You spoke to the demographics the other time and, brilliant conversation you had with Chamberlain on that issue. My question around that is the level of political education, not just awareness. You've been in the saddle, in the political, space for many years. Now, compare the level of political education today that will inform the right choice by people, not just the sentiments or pecuniary gains that you spoke to earlier. How, in the light of our current political education, given in spite of the level of awareness and excitement and all of that, how do you think the level of political education we have now, compared with what we had before, how do you think it can influence our choices in the year ahead?
Thank you, Ayo. You and I have been in the political field for quite a while as well. But clearly, I think what will influence what happens is how people vote. I think it will be quite clear to people what their experience has been in the last several years in terms of the quality of governance that they have seen, the results that they have seen from those that they have elected. I think you and I know the levels of suffering, levels of deterioration of our politics and our economy, and how this will in itself affect what happens. So my sense of it is, yes, there's a lot that needs to be done. I think political parties sometimes leave the whole issue of voter awareness and education to civil society organizations, or even expect that INEC has that responsibility. Yet it is the responsibility of political parties to provide education for their supporters, to educate their supporters on how they can vote, and the issues around the politics and economics of the country. We have seen opposition parties in this country fail to draw attention to the challenges of governance that we see, whether opposition at the state level or opposition at the national level. I think that political parties have not done their job, and they need to do a lot. But yes, for us in civil society, I think that contribution that civil society makes to voter education will continue and intensify. But certainly, you do have a much more aware population, and the hope that we have is that is translated into how vote happens.
Not to also undermine the strength of the sentiments, religious sentiments, cultural sentiments, ethnic sentiments, political sentiments, and of course, whatever gains will come from people there. How do we segue away from all of those issues and follow a national ethos? It seems a national ethos has been somewhat evasive over the years.
I think I missed a bit of what you said, but I think certainly that we do need to develop a national political culture. I think that for all of us who have seen politics better, I'm not quite sure what word to use, but better implemented, we want to see and be able to see that politics in this country focuses more on national development. When we look around the world and we see how countries prioritize development issues, and we come here and we see how Nigeria prioritizes nepotism, prioritizes mediocrity, then it troubles the hearts to see the nature of politics that we do have in this country. And the hope that we all have is that we will see citizens translate a lot of their frustration into voting for candidates who will help to elevate the nature and quality of Nigerian politics. Because quite frankly, what we do see with Nigerian politicians, with Nigerian politics, is really, really very, very mediocre, and certainly is not taking us into development. And given that the world is, we're talking of countries building new cities. We are talking of countries looking at alternative energy. We are talking of countries looking at how to improve climate change conditions. But in Nigeria here, the conversations are just really so low and so mediocre that you ask yourself why a country of such intelligent and rich potentials would be having the sort of quality of politicians who are governing its affairs at this time.
Well, rather sad, Mr. Nwankwo. And speaking of elevating the electoral process, I want to take you back to the issue of diaspora offshore funding of the electoral process. In clarifying your position the other time, you talked about how it is okay for the individual to receive the funds and not the political parties, perhaps because of the concern of money laundering. But doesn't it fly in the face of reason? Because the same political party that could be involved in money laundering, the individual too could also be receiving the funds, to perpetrate money laundering. So in this regard, don't you think that the law flies in the face of reason?
Yeah, I think what I was drawing attention to was the lacuna in the law, and how, as a lawyer, you are able to, if I was advising a client, I would be quite able to say this is what is quite clear in the law, and this is what you need to do to avoid falling foul of the law. I think that, as someone as well who has been very much involved with the process of lawmaking in this country, and seeing this gap that is being identified at this time, it's a question whether past the election or even ahead of the election, whether this is not something that the National Assembly should look at as we continue the engineering with the Electoral Act. So certainly, you should be able to have people not contribute in a way that influences the politics negatively. We did see with the U.S. elections, a Nigerian Lebanese American was indicted for contributing funds to the U.S. presidential campaign a couple of years ago in ways that the U.S. authorities felt was on an undue influence in its politics. So I think that the law should continuously be updated to ensure that we do not have foreign monies or even Nigerian monies, it doesn't matter both ways, influence the politics in a negative way. There must be a cap to what individuals can receive, and there must be a cap to what political parties can receive for the purpose of elections. And I don't think that we have come to a stage in this country where we are even able to tabulate the expenses made by political parties. You talk of physical money, but also in-kind contributions. How do we calculate that to ensure that those in-kind contributions are not of such magnitude that unfairly affects the nature of spend on elections?
I'd also like you to speak to it with regards to what happens at the domestic level as well, where in justifying funds for the purchase of, expression of interest and nomination funds, parties can peg it as high as 100 million naira and 40 million naira, and that is okay, you know, is morally right for the political parties, but it's not okay for political parties to receive funds for support of their electoral campaigns from offshore. Isn't this some form of double standard for you, Mr. Nwankwo?
I think we're all concerned about the monies paid for the primaries within some of the political parties, particularly the two main parties where candidates were paying as much as 100 million, 50 million for nomination at the presidential level. And you saw the number of persons who indicated interest to run for president in at least two of the main parties, and the amount of monies collected, which is a source of friction at this time within the executives of those parties. But certainly, I think it's completely unacceptable that you do have such numbers of monies being spent even from the beginning before someone becomes a candidate.
You know, how do you measure, because I mean, you've been at this for a very long time. How do you measure whether or not you are making progress with your advocacy from the perhaps making the legislation that has gone into Electoral Act, INEC guidelines, especially when you compare it with the outcome of elections and ultimately the performance of politicians in elections? How do you strike a balance or measure?
I think that the country, in spite of the criticisms we have of where we are now, the problem is not that we haven't made progress. The problem is that we should be far ahead of where we are today. I do remember looking at the 1999 Constitution, for instance, because this conversation around resident electoral commissioners, I do remember that in 1999, up to 2003, the president could simply appoint a resident electoral commissioner. Mm-hmm. The president could make regulations for INEC. All of these were entrenched in the Constitution. In 2009 and 2010, there was massive pressure that led to the change in the Electoral Act, for the Constitution. Because even before 2010, the chairman of INEC had to be above 50 years old. The resident electoral commissioners had to be above 40 years old. The Constitution was amended in 2010, and this was even before you began to amend other portions of the Constitution regarding the reduction of age. But the Constitution was amended in 2010 that allowed the chairman of INEC to be no less than 40. The national commissioners at the same age, and then the recs were reduced to 35. And then the president could no longer appoint recs directly. It had to go to the National Assembly for approval, the Senate for approval. So if you see what has happened from then to now, and then, of course, you had subsequently the reduction of ages for National Assembly seats and so on. This was in 2015 or so. So you've seen all of that progress come. And you have also seen, in 2006, there was an Electoral Act. In 2010, there was an Electoral Act that was made that specifically said that voting, electronic voting, is prohibited. This was amended. So we've seen quite some developments. We now see that, yes, INEC can decide on method of voting. It can decide on electronic voting. It can decide on use of technology and so on. So there's been so much progress. But again, the progress in terms of law, has it matched the progress in terms of political behavior? I think that that's where the challenge is. And I would say that our politicians have failed this country incredibly. I think that the absolute use of power by those in office has weakened our democracy. In countries, in Kenya just conducted elections. Yeah. The president and his vice were at each other's throats. And yet the vice president emerged winner of the elections. In Nigeria, the president here would use incredible extra legal measures to stop his vice from being elected. So I think that the political behavior of our politicians is what needs to be tackled. And I think that that's the challenge that we face. Yes, we make beautiful laws. How are the politicians trying not to subvert it?
That's another matter for another day. And it's a huge one at that, because someday someone was telling me that, look, they like to see a scenario in the future where we will need to be able to vote from wherever we are, such that we'll completely eliminate how we all need to gather, start collating results and wait for hours before results are announced. And so they like to see that. And perhaps when that happens, you won't have politicians who think they can perhaps wield the magic wand and ensure that results go their way, hook, line, and sinker, or by hook or crook. But whichever way it goes, is something we'll keep.
But let me just add to that observation. We also want to see a day where you can get up in the morning, go out, vote, go back to work, without the office, the offices being shut, without the country closing down.
Why do you want to take away our public holidays?
Without soldiers and military.
African countries do it here.
I was in Ghana. They had elections.
Very easily.
They went back to work as soon as you voted.
It's a big deal here, whereas it shouldn't, because it's a huge economy. But anyway, as you say, it's something I will focus on in the days ahead. But I want to thank you very much indeed, and good to see you, Mr. Clement Nwankwo, Executive Director for PLAC. We've got some.